On April 15, 1989, a tragedy took place at the Hillsborough Stadium in Sheffield, England, during a football game between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest. Police negligence led to massive overcrowding in the seating pens, which led to a human crush. The crush was so devastating, 96 people lost their lives, and 766 people were reported injured from asphyxiation. Hillsborough Stadium was chosen to host as neutral grounds for the teams. Liverpool fans gathered at the northwest part of the stadium called Leppings Lane, while Nottingham fans entered at the southeast end. Efforts were made to keep the fans from crossing each other's paths, because at the time, there were many hooligans among the fans, and often fights would break out. While this was an attempt at keeping the peace, there were more Liverpool fans than there were Nottingham. Nottingham's side had 29,800 combined capacity and 60 turnstiles for people to enter through. The northwest end of the stadium only had 23 turnstiles that met with 24,256 fans. There were normally other turnstiles around the Liverpool entrance for people to use, but because of the segregation policy, many of them were closed off so sports rivals couldn't cross each other's paths. While there was a public announcement to discourage more people from attending, the police, clubs, and local authorities at the event were more worried about the hooligans and fan fights. The game was scheduled to start around 3 p.m. Around 2:20 p.m., 350 people arrived off of 3 chartered buses. Upon their arrival, many of the fans wanted to enjoy their time with family and friends, and weren't in a hurry to try and get into the stadium. This caused congestion to build up in a short period of time. On the TV and radio, announcers told people to stay home if they didn't have a ticket because of how packed it was. Between 2:30 and 2:40, people started to cram up at the turnstiles in front of Leppings Lane. At 2:46, John Motson, the BBC football commentator at the event, could already tell there was an imbalance of distribution among the people, and signaled the cameramen to get a shot to show just how many people were there. A police constable at the event requested that the game be delayed by 20 minutes to try and ensure safer passage for the fans, as the request had been granted at a game 2 years prior. However, the request was denied. Outside the stadium, the crowd started to form a bottleneck. There were more fans arriving than there was a way for them to get in. People were showing tickets to the wrong turnstiles, but couldn't leave when denied entry because of the people behind them. At 3, the game began as scheduled, and the fans outside could hear the cheers of fans inside the stadium. There was an estimated 5,000 people just at the turnstiles trying to get in, and this aroused safety concerns from police. The superintendent that would be in charge of order for this game was David Duckenfield, who had very little experience to no experience in how to keep order and maintain a sold-out stadium crowd. Worried that the crowd was going to pose a major fatality risk, he ordered Exit Gate C to be opened to relieve the masses. This exit gate was normally used for people departing the stadium, not going in. Then to help relieve pressure, Gates A and B were then opened as well. The crowd poured in the pens at free will. No one was even checking ticket stubs at this point. Initially, there was a rush when the fans entered, but it turned into a steadily paced walk. Even at a steady paced walk, the fans began to fill a tunnel that led into the already overcrowded central pens 3 and 4. The rushing crowd had no way of knowing they were being led into an area that didn't have enough room, or what was happening in the front pens. People in the front pens were suddenly rushed from behind and pinned against each other and the barrier that separated the fans from the game on the field. For some reason, while police or stewards were usually present to direct people where they should go, they were not there to do that. A BBC report speculated that if police had positioned the 2 patrol horses on the field into the crowds correctly, they could have directed fans into the side pens. With the game just starting, there were still fans arriving into the pens from the rear entry gate. During the crush, people were so packed in they couldn't turn, they couldn't bend, or even raise their arms. Some fans, like 19-year-old Sarah Hicks, who went to the game with her sister, father, and mother, couldn't be pulled out by people trying to help. A man trying to save Sarah Hicks wasn't able to do anything when he tried to pull her up. He lost his grip on her, couldn't reach her again, and could only watch in terror as she cried and became asphyxiated. Her sister, 15-year-old Victoria Hicks, was also killed in the crush. People above in the west stands were pulling people up from the Leppings Lane terrace. In the confusion, police gathered in front of the fence and created a cordon to keep fans from escaping over the fence, thinking it was just a pitch invasion. They were pushing fans back into the crush. At approximately 3:05, a football player kicked a shot that hit the pole of Nottingham's goal barrier. Possibly as a result of the excitement, that very moment there was a surge in Pen 3, and one of the metal crush barriers gave way. This sent people flying over each other, and unfortunately, on top of any injured people who were lying in front of the barrier after managing to escape. South Yorkshire Superintendent Greenwood realized what was happening and quickly told the referee. By the time he noticed, however, fans had already broken open one of the locked gates in the barrier and were fleeing by climbing over the fence. Other fans trying to help made holes in the perimeter of the fence. The intensity of the crush broke multiple terraces. The referee called the game and sent the players to their respective locker rooms. Nottingham fans who didn't understand what was going on at the time thought there was a pitch invasion and started whistling their anger at the Liverpool side and chanting for their team to return to the field. Fans were grabbing advertising boards and running them across the field to try and carry victims to the 44 ambulances that were at the Nottingham Forest side, but they were forced back by police. Only one of those ambulances actually made it onto the field. Police prevented the other 43 from entering. 14 of the 96 fatally injured made it to the hospital. People were trying desperately to save others with CPR. While all this was going on, police were still making a cordon 3/4 of the way down the pitch to prevent Liverpool supporters from reaching the opposing supporters. At about 3:13, a grandstand news reporter announced that they finally had an explanation of the events that had unfolded. There's no question now that the problem was caused by non-ticket holders forcing their way through a broken gate at the Leppings Lane end of this ground, and the FA Cup semi-final has been suspended in the most serious fashion. As more of the disaster was observed, and after hearing a few eyewitness accounts, it became more apparent that fans without tickets weren't the cause of the chaos. There were claims against the emergency service, saying they failed to give adequate emergency treatment. The coroner who arrived on the scene, Stephen Popper, said that anybody who had been a victim couldn't be saved after 3:15 because they were already dead, but there were still fatally injured people alive after 3:15. One particular case of this was Kevin Williams. Stadium cameras showed Kevin being pulled out of the crowd at around 3:28. Eyewitnesses Tony O'Keefe and Steve Hart were there to help officers carry Kevin off the pitch, and they said he was still alive. Tony O'Keefe said in an interview, "I've seen people dead before, and I knew that there would have been a color change. His color looked okay. He was pale, but I could see he was alive." For years, police and officials blamed the fans for their own deaths. On March 26, 1991, the inquest returned a verdict of accidental death. Many families were angered by this because they knew it wasn't their loved ones' faults. On April 26, 2016, the families took to court again, and the jury ruled in their favor that the victims were unlawfully killed by police error. When the verdict was announced, the family members standing outside of Coroner's Court in Warrington, England, held hands and sang "You'll Never Walk Alone," a song that Liverpool fans sing before every game. The families finally found some peace after years of cover-ups and lies about the fans being the ones to blame. Later on, David Duckenfield, who was able to retire on medical grounds, still insisted that the spectators opened the gate and were the ones to blame. The Crown Prosecution Service was evaluating if they should press charges in light of new findings. If they did, it would most likely focus on David Duckenfield. The victims who died that day ranged from ages 10 to 69. 38 of the victims were children or teens. There were many memorials and epitaphs erected in honor of the 96 people who died from the crush throughout Liverpool and the Hillsborough Stadium. I want them 96 to rest in peace now, because they have suffered for these 27 years seeing the families suffer, said Margaret Aspinall, whose 18-year-old son James died in the crush. They did nothing wrong that day, she told Granada Reports. They were the heroes.